Welcome back, AP Psychers. In today's video, we are going to cover the final color-coded column in the back of the class, and that is the psychoanalytic approach to psychology. It's not inconceivable that you see this referenced as the psychodynamic approach to psychology. They are, for all intents and purposes, a synonym of one another. I am first going to go to the key psychologists, because if you can think back to the classroom, I know it's been a little while since we've been there, but if you think all the way to the right in those color-coded columns, that blue column has one psychologist pictured about half a dozen, maybe even more times. There's an action figure of him up there. Even to the right of the board, there's a picture of him smoking a cigar, and it's none other than Sigmund Freud. He is the singular psychologist that we associate with the psychoanalytic approach to psychology, and there is one key word that we can only use when talking about psychoanalysis, and that is the word unconscious. Psychoanalysts like Freud, neo-Freudians in the future, or even individuals today who practice psychoanalysis always emphasize what is going on an unconscious level with this individual. Again, the unconscious in Freudian terminology is often a reference to the id, the superego, and the ego, those three different entities that we described back in Unit 4. And all of psychoanalysis is predicated on what might be happening on an unconscious level. That could be if whether or not you have a fixation in the psychosexual stages that Freud articulated. Highly unlikely that that would appear on the AP exam, but it is something we briefly reference. That's an example of an unconscious conflict. Perhaps you are on an unconscious level expressing some of those defense mechanisms. There were quite a few defense mechanisms that we defined back in Unit 4. Ones like rationalization and reaction formation, denial, etc. Projection, a very common one. So a psychoanalyst like Freud or anybody else would really try to focus on what's going on an unconscious level. Could there be a fixation in accordance with the psychosexual stages? Could an individual be expressing a defense mechanism on an unconscious level? Perhaps even looking beyond that, we had some of the neo-Freudians. There were a couple neo-Freudians. There were Alfred Adler and Carl Jung. These two neo-Freudians bought into the notion of the unconscious being the primary driving force behind personality, or at least their theories. However, they disagreed on Freud's emphasis of libido or sex drive and had their own differing views. Jung's collective unconscious and Alfred Adler's inferiority complex. So those are some of the key psychologists that fall under this. In theory, if you were to see a question and it'd ask, what would a psychoanalyst view this as, or what would a psychoanalyst focus on? They're going to focus on what type of drama is going on in the unconscious. Is the id overpowering the superego? Is the ego having a difficult time balancing the two? Is this individual expressing a defense mechanism as a result of that? If you think back to the clinical psychology unit, we did have the psychoanalytic approach to therapy. Psychoanalysis itself is a therapeutic technique that often has with it dream analysis. Freud had a popular theory that dreams are reflections of unconscious conflicts, and in some way, shape, or form is the libido or an individual's libido expressing unconscious beliefs or unconscious desires. And so whether it's just psychoanalysis in and of itself as a therapeutic technique or branching over into dream theory, those are some of the things from the clinical psychology unit, and really some other units, when we talked about dreaming, for example, where psychoanalysis played out. But it's really critical that if you use the word unconscious in any capacity, at any point on the AP exam, it is exclusively in the context of Freud. It has a very specific meaning. I know sometimes students see that word and it sounds like a fancy word. Sometimes students confuse it with cognition or behavioral. If you see the word unconscious, it's a dead giveaway. You are exclusively looking at the psychoanalytic approach to psychology and are only looking at theories produced by Freud, or at least some of Freud's followers.